Okay, hi everyone. Welcome to 3D Fundamentals and Prototyping. In this course, we're going to really look at two different processes, but we're going to do them in the same piece of software. The first process is sort of the basics of 3D modeling and animation, which might be useful for all sorts of different aspects of your art practice. And then the second half of the course, we're going to look at how we can use things we've made in this process to make physical objects. So that will be prototyping. In the prototyping section of the course, we're going to focus on this little device I've got here, this sort of rotating sculpture. I'm going to introduce a few things like how to make this box. If I show you my textures, we're going to make it laser cut, probably out of wood. We're going to make these little gears that can transfer rotation from a crank 90 degrees to rotate a sculpture on top. And we're going to learn how to do some 3D modeling so that we can make files that are ready to 3D print. And I'll show you a whole bunch of basic 3D modeling techniques, as well as we might experiment with some AI, how to use AI to generate models of various objects and then how to transform them into things that we want them to be. Okay, a couple of things before we get started. The software that we're using is called Blender. Let me go to the website here. Okay, Blender is useful, I think, for many reasons for an artist. Some of the things we do in this course can be done in many different pieces of software. We could use various CAD software to make our gears and our laser cut objects. We could do animation in software like Maya. We could do 3D printing in almost any 3D software. The reason I want to use Blender is, first of all, it's open source and it's free. And I think at your point, starting out as artists, that's a really good advantage because you don't know where you're going to be working. You don't know if you're going to be in a studio where they might pay for the software, or if you're going to be starting your own sort of practice where maybe you don't have the money to pay for software. So I think starting with Blender can be really great because it gives you just the ability to stay really up to date with what's happening in 3D. Blender is always being updated with new features, and it gives you a flexible tool. So the second reason that we're going to use Blender is that I'm going to try to put all of our prototyping and 3D skills all inside Blender in this course, even though, of course, we could do them in other software. And sometimes as you get more specialized, you might want to consider shifting across depending on what your artistic needs are. Okay, so I'll get you to download Blender 4.5. I think we already have that downloaded in the computer lab, and it's sort of the current, most stable version of Blender. You can download Blender 5, but I don't think it's in the most stable form yet, and you might have some compatibility issues with what's in the computer lab. If you use Blender 5, a Blender 5 file probably won't open in a Blender 4.5 version, but it will open the other way. So if you're just staying up to date, you can always open your old files in the new version, but you can have problems trying to go the other way. So I just recommend, for maximum compatibility, just stay with the current version of Blender 4.5. Okay, so I'm going to press spacebar and pause this, and I'll start a new file. And what we're going to do is we're going to make this book. That's going to be exercise 1. But I'm also just going to, in this video, give you an introduction to the software. So I'm just going to make a new file. I'll save what I was doing here. And when you open Blender, this is what you'll see. We have 3 objects in the scene. If I click with my left mouse button, this one is the camera. That's what we render through. So anytime you make a video or an image, it's going to look through that camera at whatever is in your scene. This is an object, in this case it's a cube, and this is a light. So for example, if I go into my rendered view, we'll see that the light, if I press G for grab, is casting light on that cube. And if I go into the animation tab, this is what the camera is seeing. So if I move the camera, I press G for grab and just move my mouse, it's going to move what it's seeing. I can press left click to accept that movement. I can press Command Z or Control Z depending if you're on Mac or PC, to undo it, or I can press G for grab, and if I change my mind, I can just right click and it won't finalize the movement. Okay, these tabs here, when I shifted from layout to animation, these are just different rearrangements of different functions you can do in Blender. And we'll move through them a little bit, but you can actually change the way that the screen is set up at any time yourself. If I click up in this corner with my left mouse, I can split it, and I can, I don't know, make this one into a shader editor, and you know, it'll start to look a little bit like what I've got here in my shader editor in the shading section. So you could transform your viewport into anything you want it to be. These are just set up for your convenience of different configurations that might be useful depending on where you're up to. But you might find that all the time you might be moving things around, creating a new window so you can, you know, maybe I want to look at this object from the side here, and I want to have another 3D viewport and look at it this way. So you can always move these things around as you need them. If you want to get rid of a window, you just click in the corner and drag it back across, and it should go back to where you were. Okay, so as I was just clicking around here, I thought I'd just explain what this is. This is our, I think it's called a gizmo. It gives us the ability to look directly down any of these three Cartesian axes. The x-axis is red, the y-axis is green, and the z-axis, which is not currently visible in my view by default, is blue. I think I can probably make it visible if I, whoops, click in here. Now we can see the z-axis, okay? But that's sometimes a bit annoying, sometimes I think by default it's hidden. Okay, so if I click on one of these, it's not just the direction of my view that's changed, but I've gone from a perspective view to an orthographic view. And what that means is if I press Z on my keyboard, I can change the way my viewport is rendering. Instead of a rendered view, I can go to a solid view where there's no lighting, or I can go to a wireframe. And here I'm just seeing between. Okay, I should also explain how I'm looking around the scene. When I want to rotate my view like this, I'm using the middle mouse button. I'm just clicking it down and rolling around. I can also do 2 fingers on my touchpad on my laptop. That does the same thing. If I want to move my view side to side, I press Shift and middle mouse. So that's kind of how we move our view around. So let's go back to this question of orthographic versus perspective. If I try to line up this face here, you'll see that I can never get this, which just looks like a perfect square. So why is that? Okay, so here we can sort of see the perspective that all of these lines here that are parallel to the x-axis, they're all converging. They're all going to join up in infinity. And in fact, I'll just press, I'll just do something really quickly. I'll scale it on the x-axis. And if I make it really, really long, like SX100, and we look down, we can actually see the lines are going together as they go to the horizon. Okay, so that's our perspective. I'll just, oops, press undo, Command Z to go back to my cube. Okay, whereas if I'll just put that SX500 thing back here. If I still go down my perspective view, again, I've still just got a square. And the reason here is that when I click my gizmo and I get an orthographic view, an orthographic view has no perspective. It's just looking straight down one axis with no perspective. So therefore, the square at the front of my object and the square at the very end stay the same size. So that's why we're seeing 2 squares just slightly overlapped. My object is really long now, but if I make it a little bit shorter, what I could do, if I go into edit mode by pressing tab, when I'm in edit mode, I can start to alter this object. So you'll see if I press tab, I'm going to go from object mode to edit mode, and I can also switch that here. Edit mode allows us to make changes not just to the scale of the object or its position, but to its individual components. I guess going back to the Renaissance, we define 3D objects by usually 3 components. A vertex is where 2 lines meet. An edge, if I go into this mode, is the distance between 2 vertexes. Or a face is the two-dimensional area made up by 3 or more edges, right? If that was a triangle, we'd have two triangular faces there. And we can select according to each of those 3 parameters. And I can change them here from vertex to edge to face, or if I just press 1, 2, 3 on my keyboard, that switches between these 3. And that's really common, you know, sometimes we want to select things by its face, sometimes we want to select by an edge, sometimes we want to select by vertex. But I'm just going to move one vertex a little bit. If I press G for grab, and I just move it a bit, and left click, and now I look down that x-axis. If I look here, we're going to see, now if I press sort of, if I go back into edge mode, we might see it a bit better. And if I go into wireframe, we should see it, or get out of edit mode, sorry, we should see it even better. Now, the front and the back of the object are different. So it's no longer just a square. What we've got here, if I go into edit mode and I press 3 to go into face selection, we've got one face here and probably another face that's on the back of the object. And they're different shapes, so therefore, when we look down the orthographic view, we see that they're different. But the cool thing is that we see exactly how they're different. And if we want to sort of make them the same again, I can actually just move this back to the first one. And if I want to be really precise, I can turn on this little magnet tool that says snapping, and I could snap to a vertex. And if I pressed G, Y, G for grab, and Y, and I hover over that vertex, it'll snap to it on the Y axis, and we're pretty close now. And if I press GZ, it'll snap back to it there. So now if I go out of edit mode, we should be back to that just an elongated cube. Okay, so that's what the orthographic axes are, and that's why they're useful. They're there for like precision modeling, because working in a perspective mode, it'll be very hard for me to line these two up perfectly, because even if I look down here, even though they're in the same place, I can't really see it, you know, it's too tricky because the perspective gets in the way. So that's why the orthographic view is really important. Okay, so I'm going to press Tab to go out of edit mode. And what's some other basic things I should tell you? Okay, here's one. We're going to save our file. Even though we haven't really made anything yet, it's important to save early on. So I will go File, Save. And what you're going to do, if I go up here, this is my course folder, 3D Fundamentals. I'm going to open that, and you can see I've got all these folders here. And you're going to make all of these folders as you go. And it's really important. I don't want you saving your work on the desktop or in your downloads folder or anywhere like that. It's really important to have good file management. So if I just go out to my Finder here, you'll see that we're looking at these same folders here. This is my 3D Fundamentals. Here's my, my timetable and so on. And I've got my project files, which are, you can see I've been playing around a bit. I've got a few different Blender projects. I've got some 3D models that I've made. Later on in the course, we'll talk about rendering. These are some frames that I've rendered of the animation. These are some photos that I'm using as reference for one of the objects we make. Okay, I've duplicated it here by accident. This is a reference image I'm using for like the shelf. This is something that I 3D printed. It's my gear. Some textures. You're going to learn what all of these things are. And then this is the first video I made where I rendered the animation. So it's really important that you start to organize your files like this, because later on you might need to take this whole folder and take it to another computer, and you're going to need all of these components. So it's really important to organize your things as you go. So with that in mind, if we're coming back here, I'd like you to start a new folder, call it 3D Fundamentals, and in there make a folder called Project Files. And in there, I want you to save your project. You can call it whatever you like. I recommend having a file name like 3D_Funder_ you can put your name just in case, it's ever on a USB and you don't want it confused with other people's work. Okay, so I'm going to call this 3D Funder number 3 because that's the one I showed you before. And then this was my first testing. So I keep the old files. So now I'm going to hit save. Okay, and then I'm going to end this video here, and I'm going to start again from here, and I'm going to make the book with you.